At dawn on a cold European morning, the sound did not arrive like thunder. It came low, distant, almost calm. German tank crews heard it while engines idled and exhaust hung in the air. At first, it did not sound like danger. It was not artillery, it was not bombers. It was something faster, closer, and far more personal. Within minutes, roads would burn, steel would tear open. Armored columns would vanish under fire from the sky. This is the story of how German armor lost its freedom to move, why daylight became deadly, and how a single aircraft carrying a simple weapon quietly destroyed the belief that tanks still ruled the battlefield. In the opening years of the war, German armor appeared unstoppable. Panzer divisions smashed through Poland, rolled across France, and drove deep into the Soviet Union. Speed, coordination, and shock defined their success. Armor was not just a tool. It was doctrine, it was confidence, it was identity. Steel moved fast. Steel decided outcomes. But by 1943, cracks were already forming. Losses mounted. Fuel became scarce. Replacement crews were less experienced, and most critically, German control of the air was slipping away. By the spring of 1944, the truth became unavoidable. German armor was no longer being destroyed mainly in great tank battles. It was being stopped, scattered, and destroyed on roads, at forest edges, near villages, and at crossroads, often without ever seeing an enemy tank. The weapon doing this was not another armored vehicle, not artillery, not bombs dropped from high altitude. It was a rocket fired from a fighter aircraft many German pilots had initially dismissed. The aircraft was the P-47 Thunderbolt. On paper, it looked unimpressive. Large, heavy, thick-bodied. It did not turn sharply, and it did not climb quickly. Compared to sleek German fighters, it appeared clumsy. German pilots mocked it. German soldiers on the ground did not. They gave it a different name, Jabo, short for fighter bomber, and they learned to fear the sound of its engine more than shellfire. When Thunderbolts appeared overhead, movement stopped. Columns froze in place. Crews shut down engines and ran for ditches, hedgerows, or tree lines, because what followed usually arrived in seconds. By late 1943, Allied commanders faced a deadly problem. German armor remained dangerous, especially when defending. Tanks could hide in forests, villages, and hedgerows. High-altitude bombers were too inaccurate against moving targets. Fighters armed only with machine guns could destroy trucks but struggled against thick armor. Something different was needed, something simple, something brutal. The answer arrived beneath the wings of the P-47, unguided rockets. They were crude weapons by design. They were not meant to be precise. Each rocket carried a heavy warhead capable of tearing through armor, smashing tracks, or detonating with enough force to flip a vehicle and ignite fuel. Accuracy was useful, but it was not required. Fired in salvos, rockets transformed narrow roads into kill zones. One pass could stop a column. A second pass could erase it. Training for this role intensified in early 1944. Pilots practiced flying low, often just above treetop heights, skimming terrain to avoid radar and flak. They learned to read roads, identify choke points, and attack where vehicles could not escape. Timing mattered. Speed mattered. One mistake meant death from anti-aircraft fire or small arms. But the Thunderbolt was built for punishment. Its massive radial engine, armored cockpit, and thick skin allowed it to absorb damage that would tear other fighters apart. Pilots began to trust that the aircraft could bring them home. The true test came in France. On June 6, 1944, Allied troops landed in Normandy. German Panzer divisions received urgent orders. Move immediately. Reach the beaches. Crush the invasion. The roads of Normandy filled with tanks, half-tracks, fuel trucks, artillery, and command vehicles. Destroyed bridges and dense hedgerows forced them onto narrow routes, vehicles packed tightly together, stretching for miles. Above those roads, Allied air patrols waited. By mid-morning, Thunderbolts were already hunting. Pilots reported columns so dense that targets seemed endless. As aircraft dived, rockets streaked forward with a violent hiss. Front vehicles erupted. Blocking the road, flames spread. Ammunition detonated. Crews tried to reverse, but there was nowhere to go. More rockets followed, then bombs, then machine gun fire. German reports described chaos. Units lost contact. Schedules collapsed. Orders arrived too late or not at all. Some divisions lost over half their vehicles before ever reaching the front. Not to tanks, not to infantry, but to aircraft firing rockets at close range. The psychological impact was devastating. Movement during daylight became nearly impossible. German commanders ordered columns to travel only at night. Even then, wreckage from daytime attacks clogged roads and slowed progress. Fuel shortages worsened. Repair units could not keep up. Every engine start became a gamble. Every movement risked annihilation. The Thunderbolt had become the hammer. One reason it worked so well was speed of response. Unlike bombers, Thunderbolts could be redirected quickly. Forward air controllers on the ground radioed targets directly. Sometimes pilots arrived within minutes. Veteran pilots learned that direct hits were rare. They aimed instead at tracks, engine decks, or the ground beside tanks, using blast and fragmentation to do the work. Damaged tracks immobilized vehicles. Fires forced crews to abandon them. A single disabled tank in the wrong place could block an entire column. Once stopped, the column was helpless. By July 1944, air-ground coordination had become brutally efficient. Around St. Lo, German armor attempted repeated counterattacks. Each time, Thunderbolts appeared. Pilots flew multiple sorties a day, landing only to refuel and rearm before returning. Ground troops began to associate the Thunderbolt's engine with survival. When attacks stalled, soldiers looked upward. German countermeasures struggled. Anti-aircraft guns were heavy and slow to move. Camouflage helped briefly. Smoke screens failed under wind and confusion. The sky no longer belonged to Germany. This reality reshaped Allied tactics. Infantry advanced more aggressively, knowing armor could be neutralized from above. Tank crews pushed forward with confidence. Battles that once lasted days were decided in hours once German reinforcements were destroyed en route. By August, during the breakout from Normandy, the effect became overwhelming. Retreating columns were attacked relentlessly. Roads became graveyards of twisted steel, like the remains of a shattered spine stretching across the countryside. Pilots described firing rockets until empty, then strafing until ammunition ran out. Some aircraft returned so damaged that mechanics struggled to understand how they were still flying. German officers later admitted the truth. The fear of air attack shattered discipline. Orders were ignored. Vehicles were abandoned at the first sound of engines. Too aggressive costs. As Allied forces pushed east, the pressure never stopped. From France into Belgium, from the Ardennes toward the Rhine. The same lesson repeated again and again. Daylight meant danger. Roads meant death. By autumn 1944, Thunderbolt squadrons rotated constantly. If one group landed, another was already airborne. Weather no longer mattered. Rain, fog, broken cloud. If a road was visible, it was attacked. Each Thunderbolt now carried a standard load of rockets beneath its wings. 8 weapons, each capable of ripping steel apart. A typical attack followed a familiar pattern. Movement spotted, aircraft dropped low, road lined up. Trigger pulled, explosions walked down the column. For the men on the ground, it felt unstoppable. This pressure peaked during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. German forces advanced under heavy cloud while Allied aircraft were grounded. For several tense days, armored columns moved, then the skies cleared. On December 23rd, Thunderbolts filled the air. Forest roads and village streets became traps. Snow offered no protection. Traffic jams formed, and vehicles sat helpless beneath the sky. A single destroyed tank at a crossroads could halt an entire advance. Pilots hunted these choke points deliberately. German crews abandoned usable tanks not because they were destroyed, but because moving them in daylight had become impossible. By January 1945, the offensive was broken. German armor had not been defeated only by enemy tanks. It had been bled dry on the roads. As Allied forces crossed into Germany, no rear area was safe. Rail yards burned. Supply depots vanished. Even newly issued tanks were sometimes destroyed within hours. German adaptations followed: extra roof armor, camouflage nets, wider dispersion. None solved the real problem. Germany no longer controlled the air. For Allied soldiers, the Thunderbolt became a symbol of reassurance. When battles turned desperate, they listened for its engine. Help often arrived faster than expected. Pilots paid the price. Low-level attacks were deadly. Anti-aircraft fire was constant. Many Thunderbolts returned riddled with holes. Some did not return at all. By spring 1945, fuel shortages crippled what remained of German armor. Tanks were abandoned without firing a shot. The rocket, once dismissed as crude, had proven decisive. It did not require perfection. It required pressure. When the war ended in May 1945, analysts understood what had changed. Armor still mattered. Infantry still mattered. Artillery still killed. But freedom of movement was gone. Across Europe, burned hulls and silent roads told the story. For the Panzer crews who survived, one memory remained strongest. Not enemy tanks, not artillery, the sudden roar from above, the scream of rockets. 1 second silence and the certainty that there was nowhere left to run. Which part of his story stayed with you?